agenda today. The first thing that we're going to do is start off with roll call. Then we're going to be talking about a future state scenario workshop with HDR and Eunomia. And then, as always, we will close up the meeting with opening up to public comment. I'll actually turn it over to our co-chair, Angie, just to say some things, and then we'll get right into the workshop.
Good morning, guys. Thank you all for being here. We greatly appreciate your attendance and your insight. It is an action-packed show today. It really is. We have a lot to cover, and we're very interested and we're very excited to hear everyone's comments. But in lieu of the 2-hour time frame, which is a ton of cover as you've seen in the emails from Bradley, we would like everybody to kind of please be kind. Keep the comments if we can, not to a minimum, but let's get out our thoughts and then we can, further discuss offline if that's okay. Again, we want to hear what everyone has to say. We think everyone's opinion is important. That's why we're all here. But again, we all have other jobs to do. We have to keep it in the 2 hours. So please be mindful of that. And again, let's discuss anything you would like to discuss. We're happy to do that offline as a group or in a different meeting. But I just wanted to kind of get that on the floor and discuss that. So thank you, Bradley.
Yeah, and with that being said, since we are kind of strapped for time, we'll actually do roll call with it. So if you have a seat on the advisory council, if you could just put your name in the chat, and we'll do roll call that way. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Eric.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for being here today, and we really look forward to this discussion. I know that this group has been really self-motivated. I think that was some of the comments that Michael had mentioned last time. Providing lots of feedback and great engagement, and we want to keep that momentum going and help to build on that today. But echoing what Angie said, we will pretty rigorously hold this group to a strict time frame, and we will do our best to maintain the conversation specifically on the areas that Eunomia is going to be walking us through. Hopefully what we can do is come away with some clear understanding, being able to take in this group's feedback to be able to advance our modeling over what is a very accelerated schedule to prepare a draft needs assessment early in 2025. So hopefully everybody understands the constraints that we're under. And if I chime in and say, hey, can we continue a conversation offline, or please provide your comments in the chat. We will be monitoring and taking feedback via the chat, as well as providing opportunities for discussion. So with that, I'll pass it over to Michael Wasserman with Eunomia, just to introduce yourself, anybody else on the team that's here, Michael, and then to be able to share the slide deck and we can get going.
Yeah, thanks, Eric, and thanks, Bradley. So just to introduce myself again, my name is Michael Wasserman. I'm a senior consultant at Eunomia. Eunomia is a circular economy consulting firm based, our office is based in New York, but we also have offices in the UK, Belgium, and New Zealand. So we work on EPR and circular economy topics across the globe. I'm also joined here by my colleague, John Carhart, who's also a senior consultant based on our office. So as Eric mentioned, we really have, a pretty packed schedule we want to get through. So we're going to spend a few minutes just providing a quick overview of the workshop objective. The next section, part one, we're really just framing kind of Maryland's recycling system overall with, EPR systems and other recycling systems globally. The second part two, we're going to go over some baseline results. So based on our modeling, where does Maryland stand now in terms of their recycling system for covered products that would be covered under a EPR system? And the third part, the bulk of this this workshop, and really the objective is in this part three. So part three, we're contracted to model one future state of what EPR can achieve in Maryland. There's a lot of ways you can design an EPR system. So we want to get advice from the advisory council on how that system can be designed, because there's a lot of options to choose from. We want to get your advice to just make sure it's something that's realistic, plausible, and overall agreeable by the council. And then we'll save some time for any other business. So Eric, just on the schedule.
Yeah, so this is the same schedule that we showed when we met in November. What we're seeing here is that we are far along on all of these tasks, and our team has been working really hard to do them all concurrently, which has been a major challenge. So, just hats off to the team that's been working on this. There are a lot of people, several different companies behind the scenes that are working very, very hard on this. We are getting to the point where we are writing the technical memos related to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and part of 11, and we are at this point where we're getting into 12 and 13. And the workshop today is a major milestone to help us continue to move forward with our scope. So appreciate everyone being here. And we are targeting the end of January as shown for a final work product.
Thanks, Eric. So just a bit on kind of how we're designing this workshop, taking into consideration the time and what we need to get accomplished. Part 1 and part 2, so that's just, EPR systems, where Maryland sits, the baseline assessment. We're going to be presenting only. Unfortunately, we're not able to take questions. We can get into baseline discussion for hours, so we want to make sure we hit this part 3, which is what we really need your feedback from. So part 3 is where we're going to be talking about future scenario factors for modeling a future state. We're going to present kind of potential option, how it's sitting right now in the modeling, and other options that we considered. So we're going to take your feedback through a discussion that we'll have. There'll be limited time on each, so there may be at points that Eric said we'll have to just stop and move on. Maybe we can take things offline, but we're going to see how today goes.
Yeah, and one thing before you move on, just a couple of housekeeping items. We do want to keep the discussion today focused on considerations specific to EPR. So again, echoing Angie, keep it polite and refrain from the B word or the F word, being bottle bill or flow control or some of these other topics which are kind of happening alongside EPR, but we want to be able to provide Eunomia and their team the critical feedback that they need to be moving forward with the scope. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And this is to help provide some advice and to show where we should be kind of moving to. There might be questions on really specific kind of what input did you use for cost of X or the tonnage of Y? And we're not really going to get into the specific. We just want kind of understand how we should frame the scenario modeling. And we're going to be working with HDR, with MDE on those inputs and making sure we have the data for that. So, we'll try to not go into really, really specifics because we can get stuck in that. So really just wanted to help frame kind of where Maryland sits in terms of EPR generally and recycling. So Maryland right now, the MRA recycling rate is about 39%. Based on Eunomia's 50 States of Recycling report, when looking at EPR recycling in Maryland compared to other states, Maryland does pretty well when you consider without fiber, about 12th against other states when you include fiber, so corrugated cardboard. This does not include mixed paper, but Maryland sits about 7th, so pretty good when you compare it to other states. But as we know, when looking at other jurisdictions globally, EPR can help systems achieve much higher recycling rates. So that table on the right, these aren't apples to apples comparisons. There might be different in methodology. There's different systems, but overall, we know EPR can achieve higher recycling rates and help, provide recycle rates up to 50, 60, 70, 80%, which is much higher than Maryland is currently sitting. So really the story, Maryland's doing good compared to its peers in the US, but when you look globally, there's a lot more that can be achieved, and EPR is one policy mechanism that can help Maryland achieve that. So also just want to help frame, what Maryland, what does Maryland want to achieve with EPR? This is based on, what the advisory council has said, what we've heard from other stakeholders, as HDR has gone out and talked to a lot of different people. So as we're kind of thinking about how the future state modeling is going to be, designed, keeping these in mind for that. So increasing recycling rates, decreasing contamination, increasing recycling capacity, increasing safety, access, opportunities for WMBE individuals and companies, addressing environmental health and impact of packaging, and promoting responsible end markets. So we, just wanted to reframe this as we're thinking about future. This is kind of what we wanted to keep in mind when we're thinking about, designing a future state to understand what EPR can achieve. In terms of, EPR policy, there's a lot of different things to consider. This is, maybe not a fully comprehensive list. I'm sure there's a lot of experts on the call who might say, oh, maybe we should include this. This is just kind of a high-level overview to provide some context, EPR, where EPR sits in terms of policy and what we're talking about for the future scenario modeling in the future. So there's a lot of different things that like an EPR framework or bill can cover, what materials and who is covered by that, what data and infrastructure are required within the EPR program. There's, financial considerations in terms of the fees. Does the system eco-modulate fees? Are there de minimis for any, smaller producers? And communication enforcement. Does the bill have targets? What does the governance look like? Is there a single PRO? Are there multiple PROs? We're focused on this modeling is a bit more on the operational considerations. So I've identified kind of a few, but like how the material is collected, what the recycling process and end markets is, how much education and communication there is. So that's kind of where the scenario modeling fits in terms of EPR. We're not really looking exactly at, how the PRO sits or what the fees are or whether materials eco-modulated. Those aren't really factors within that. We're taking a bit of what the bill kind of said previously, taking some of that, and then some of the more operational considerations of when you implement EPR, what does that look like? Yeah, so that was just like a high level overview, really saying there's a lot, Maryland's doing well, Maryland can improve with EPR, and there's a lot you can consider when designing a framework bill for EPR. Those kind of 12 different policy considerations really are kind of a pathway that can help you design a bill. What we're talking about today slots into a couple of those when thinking about more detailed operational considerations. So just wanted to help frame, we're not going to be going over every single one of those, but it'll help consider, when designing a bill, some of the operational considerations will, be able to achieve X performance for Y cost. And that's really what we're going over today.
Hey, Michael, can I just jump
Sure,
in there?
please.
Just want to kind of, can you go back to that slide for a second? Because I think it's just important for this group to understand, and we just want to be able to set our expectations on what will be modeled here. And so this is showing just 3 out of the 12 what are very key considerations for EPR, and we're going to get into a lot of detail on the 3 that we've identified here based on the stakeholder engagement that we've done and discussions. But as we get into the baseline results that we've been working on so far and talking about the operational considerations, I think that they'll be very helpful in terms of informing some of the discussions here on the the ones that are not our key focus of our scope. but the modeling is not going to provide all of the answers to all of these topics, if that makes sense. So we just want to make sure to just be upfront with the expectations in terms of what's going to be included in the needs assessment. Again, we think it'll be very helpful and informative, but more so for program planning than it will be for getting the bill necessarily across the finish line, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Eric. I'm going to pass now to my colleague, John, who's going to take us a bit through how we, did the baseline modeling and what results we have. John, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you say again?
How's this?
It's okay. Yeah, maybe get started.
Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to take us through how we sort of calculated our initial baseline results. So the HDR team and the water project team have been doing a ton of data collection on infrastructure and current flows within the state. So they conducted a new waste characterization. They've surveyed every county in the state. We've reviewed every county solid waste management plan, and have also done a bit more secondary research on every county in the state. So that's sort of the raw data that we've taken into our waste flow model, which has then been cleaned by county and material type. And once we do all that data cleaning, we can arrive at sort of our baseline by material, by generator type, and by county. So trying to get granular results from this sort of bottom-up modeling approach. And now we are sort of at this orange square where we are having some initial baseline numbers and are validating that with higher level state reported numbers and other stakeholder input and review. So that is sort of the stage we are at in the waste flow modeling. And then once we have that baseline all set out, we have our alterations to service under EPR, which is sort of the focus of the scenario workshop today, to decide exactly which types of operational considerations we're going to model under the future state of EPR. And then from there, we get our sort of EPR waste flow, EPR costs, and EPR benefits as the outputs of the model. So that is sort of what the future state results will look like. But at a high level, this is sort of our approach that we've taken to modeling the baseline and future state in Maryland. So we then on to the next slide. Yep. So these are the materials which we have evaluated as part of this analysis. So every year Maryland reports its MRA recycling rate, but we don't include every material that is within that recycling rate. We are focused on sort of these 7 general material categories for our modeling. So that includes mixed paper products, which includes like compostable food packaging, poly-coated paper products, so cartons, paper cups, OCC and cardboard, rigid plastic packaging, flexible plastic packaging, metal packaging, so aluminum and tin cans, aluminum foil, things like that, and then glass bottles and jars. What our analysis does not include is food and yard waste organics, any construction and demolition waste, any HHW, and sort of other non-municipal waste that would not fall under the scope of this EPR program. So as Michael mentioned before, Maryland most recently reported a 39% MRA recycling rate statewide. So that's including sort of all those materials I listed on the previous slide, plus the sort of C&D and HHW. The difference between our needs assessment modeling and the MRA is that the needs assessment is sort of those packaging and paper products only. And it appears that those packaging and paper products account for about a quarter of total MRA generated in the state. So it's about 25% of the waste stream of MRA is packaging and paper products. And our sort of baseline findings show that our estimated recycling rate for Maryland for that packaging and paper products only category is about 32 to 34%, sort of depending on some material definitions and classifications. So it's a bit lower than the overall MRA rate, but still, in the 30s, and compared to other states in the U.S. is still relatively higher. Cool. So this is our sort of preliminary recycling rates by material type. So what percent of material in the state is generated that is recycled. So along the x-axis, you have each material category. On the y-axis, you have the target material that is sort of sorted and turned into a commodity and sent for further recycling. So it is one step past collection. And we've split out the results by residential and commercial / ICI sectors. So trying to get a more granular idea of what the rates look like on a sector by sector basis, as those different sectors can have different strategies to improve recycling under EPR. So we want to make sure that we can separate the recycling rates for each of those sectors. So you can see that glass bottles and jars sit between 40 and 40% in the recycling rate. This currently includes ADC right now. It is sort of anything that leaves as a commodity. However, when we do our final recycling rate and what is actually recycled, we will likely take that off. We are just in the process of still figuring out exactly how much might be sent for ADC currently. So this is sort of an upper bound probably for the glass packaging, but it is possible that as we figure out exactly where the material is being sent, that might go down a bit. Then we have our metal packaging, including foil and trays, rigid plastic packaging. And then flexible plastic packaging and film. There doesn't appear to be any recycling going on in Maryland currently. Mixed paper products around 30% for both residential and commercial. And then OCC and box board, you see a big split between residential and the commercial sector, 41% for the residential, 56% for the commercial sector, and then under 10% for cartons and polycoated fiber for both sectors. So this is sort of our preliminary recycling rates, what we're looking at our initial modeling. But we will continue to compare this with other sources and sense check with stakeholders and continue to work through exactly what the recycling number is.
And John, can you just, there was a comment in the chat just about multifamily, so that's included in the residential, right?
Correct, yes. Multifamily is included in residential. Cool, so then this chart just shows the recycling rate of each sort of higher level material category along the x-axis, and then the statewide tons disposed along the y-axis. So as we mentioned, a waste characterization was performed for this study. So we sort of wanted to show what is the composition of the disposal stream and what is sort of disposed in the most quantities. And basically the takeaway is that every material category has additional tons which can be captured. And that just because you might have a relatively higher recycling rate, there is still tonnage disposed that can be captured and put into the circular economy. Cool. And then I think this is the last slide on here, but this is our sort of preliminary residential curbside active service rates. So we're trying to estimate exactly what the percentage of households, both single family and multifamily in the state have active curbside service. So curbside recycling service. So who is currently using a service where they can place their recyclables in a curbside bin. So based on our county and municipality surveys, we are looking at an initial estimate of about 80% of households in the state having active service for curbside recycling. 53% of those coming from county reported programs. Then 9% of households have municipal run systems in the that's this teal 9% in the bottom right. That number is likely to increase a bit as we are confirming with more and more municipalities how many households have service at the municipality level. And then we sort of have this remainder of 38% or so of households who have open market access, but they don't have a mandatory or requirement to opt into those open market services. But from our survey work, we have gotten estimates on what proportion of those households might elect to take those or opt into those open market services. So, that it seems to range from about 50 to 60% on average, but we will continue to refine that number and apply that to the remainder of households who don't have the sort of universal required curbside recycling access.
Cool. Thanks, John, for going over the baseline. If anyone has any quick questions that you think just need some clarification, there are some good ones on multifamily and other things. As I go through some of this, John, if you just want to provide any responses back, but I think they're up to date at this point in the chat. Cool. So we did good on time. We have about 90 minutes now to go over this operational consideration section with the introduction that I'll provide to this, and then there's about 8 different considerations we're looking at. So that leaves about 10 minutes per consideration. We want to try and stick to that. Maybe some will be a little bit shorter. Some, maybe it'll go over a few minutes. But yeah, we really appreciate the expertise, the knowledge, the passion of this group. So want to make sure we get your advice as we move into this modeling exercise. So just again, what we're trying to do is estimate the performance, cost, and benefits of a future recycling system in Maryland under EPR. That doesn't, because the bill hasn't yet passed, we don't have a particular time bound associated with that future system but for just understanding purposes, you can think it's about 5 years after the bill passes. There's some time for some investment to be made in the system, getting some of those upgrades. There's time for things to be improved. It's not just day one of the system, it's after a few years. So since we're only contracted to evaluate one future EPR scenario, that's why we want to make sure we get feedback from different stakeholders. We don't want to create something that isn't a possibility of what would be designed in the future. We want it to be realistic. We want it to be what stakeholders in Maryland are looking for. And with that, there's really a lot of operational considerations that can impact the system. And these impact both performance and cost as you think about, different recycling systems around the country. You can collect a lot, have a really, really robust system, but that increases costs of finding, the balance of what that system will look like. So we're going to go over kind of what we can change within the model, what those factors are, what those considerations are to get your feedback. So we'll present kind of a potential option and then have the advisory committee, input into that. But as mentioned, we're not going to go over a lot of the detailed assumptions or input. Just want to also kind of frame this kind of modeling exercise. This is an estimate based on a potential future performing system. So, this is based on the available data that we have, based on, examples of maybe data we have in other systems that have created a similar system that we're designing. But, it is an estimate. This is doing, the best estimate that we can based on available data. So there may be ranges to that. And then also this is to help kind of understand what EPR can achieve. But as we move into, design of the system, there can be, adjustments. This isn't like a legally bounded, scenario consideration. We just want to get input to provide a realistic system to understand what the future performance, cost, and benefits of an EPR system are.
Yeah, can I just underscore that last point that you made, Michael? As we go through this, we're not suggesting that certain areas would be potentially required to do everything. This is really input for the purposes of the modeling to understand the baseline against one potential future scenario. So it's not locking in any jurisdiction or the state to any particular EPR model, but hopefully will provide a pretty data-driven understanding of what EPR can do for the state.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So these are the 8 different considerations that we're going to go over today. So for each of these, we're going to tell you where they sit kind of at baseline, what type of impact they would have on the system, and then also what, how the option that we currently have kind of sitting in the model and some other considerations that we have for feedback. So, basically how we have it now, we're looking for feedback. Yes, totally agree. That's great. Maybe consider some of the other options that we considered. Looking for your feedback would be really appreciated. And for anything, understanding your reasoning or why you're suggesting something different, or the context around that would be helpful as well. Because maybe we can meet your expectation and need, through a different way. So understanding that would be appreciated. So we have frequency. So like how often is material going to be collected from households? We'll look at access. That's different for residential and commercial. And again, multifamily is included in that residential. How material is going to be collected from curbside households. What materials are going to be accepted at curbside and drop off. So that's not, the covered materials of the system, that's already defined, but what of those covered materials, what are going to be collected, looking at compliance, education, and then also technology investment. So that's what we have to get through today. So yeah, I guess it's part 3 now. So Pete, you can ask, I guess, but definitely want to get to it.
Sorry, just really quickly. Sorry, I wasn't under the impression that we have come to the decision as to what materials are designated. Because I guess the question is, and maybe I missed this, but are we including all packaging? Are we including service packaging? Are we including products that are sold that are, essentially packaging, like pie plates? Like, is some of that detail needed in order to run the model?
As I understand, Bradley, correct me if I'm wrong, but the definition of packaging was in the previous bill, so that's what we're basing it some off of. And then in terms of the really, really detailed exemptions, like how much of a, I guess, understanding if you think they would have that big of an impact on like the top level cost and impact, and maybe we can talk about refining some of that a bit as well. I don't know if Bradley, you have anything to add.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So one of the 2 things that wasn't stripped from the Senate Bill 222 were the definitions. So we're even at the starting point. So packaging materials within there, including packaging materials, does not include. So for example, packaging materials includes primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging, carry out bulk good bags, beverage containers. And then our exclusions are pesticides. There's 2 types of medical devices that are excluded, and then liquid petroleum gas containers as well.
So all other reuse refill is included?
I'm Coladoc, a non-invasive way to screen at home on your schedule. And
Sorry, we're getting some
Mine's
background.
muting. Mark, fine, off.
Hey, let me just jump in here as this kind of moderator. I think, Pete, that's a really good question. If we could turn to that in the accepted materials portion of the slides coming up, we can talk about maybe kind of drawing that distinction between the modeling, which is more downstream, and the pros considerations, which is a bit more upstream, and how to balance that in the modeling effort.
Yeah, totally, Eric. My only comment is just accepted materials is what's accepted at the curb, not what's generating your numbers as to how much materials are available and how you're collecting those materials.
Yeah, but John, correct me if I'm wrong, but right now we have kind of a kind of wide scope of the included materials of all packaging and paper products. So looking at based on the waste comp, yeah, like all of those would be included, except for the exemptions listed. So I don't know, John, if you have anything to add there, but something we could refine.
Yeah, that's correct.
And Scott, we'll take one more and then need to jump in.
Well, my questions are similar to Peter's, residential and commercial and tertiary, and so that includes B2B stuff that never hits the curb. I mean, there are some scope issues here. Set aside, I'll have an offline conversation with you about the data on the glass and all of that I think is being ignored. But
it's not being ignored. We're still updating things so we can do it. So yeah, but
it's not. There's no state that calls alternate daily cover recycling.
Yeah, so we just need to we just need to identify how much that is and take that off.
It's half of the glass in Maryland. Half of the glass in Maryland is going to alternate daily cover. It's not being recycled right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sorry. It's just, I submitted a lot of data. We did data. We paid for extra data to be done. We submitted data. We've offered to go through contamination levels.
Yep, Scott, we'd be happy to follow up offline on the details here.
Is in scope with what Peter's asking. B2B stuff that never hits the residential recycling stream. I mean, some states do it, but not all states do it.
Yeah, so as mentioned, we're following the definition that Bradley mentioned that includes tertiary right now. If there's a big, comments from the board, we can take those comments as well. Okay, we'll take one more from Ellen just to make sure we're clear on what this is and then have to jump into it.
Now we're clear on what this is. I just want to put a pin on that. The bill where these are decisions that I thought were supposed to be delivered to the General Assembly in a framework that was passed by this organization, not through the consultant modeling and then deliberated on, and then the pro deliberate and make recommendations. So I did just want to flag that. You don't have to respond, but this was, it's just important to me as we go forward that I'll say this one time today is we had a responsibility that Bill tasked us with delivering to the General Assembly a framework. We didn't do that. And now it seems like we're getting outside the scope of what we were required to do and deliver. That's just an opinion from what I see. But again, I'm going to put my hand down and leave it at that. The law was clear. And so that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
So on that, so when the SB222 was turned into a study bill, the definitions were not taken out, but the program considerations were. So we're using that as a starting point. There's opportunities for those to change, and the needs assessment does require us to assess the cost of an EPR program as well, which is why we're doing this effort.
Yeah, and I think since this process is different than other states and we're doing, a needs assessment first, our kind of perspective was to take a little bit of wider scope, what the system can achieve. So that's like including tertiary. And then as the bill gets defined, you can kind of, it's not mandatory that this is followed for the bill as you develop a framework bill. So if the advisory council has different opinions on that approach, we're happy to take that and refine the modeling. But we just, want to be clear on, we were contracted to do one scenario, want to make sure that scenario is overall agreeable by everybody. That's what the session is about. So like Pete, Scott, definitely great feedback. We're going to take that and we can make some adjustments to that. But with that, just want to move forward.
Yeah, and we can move forward. And we did schedule a meeting in January to discuss framework as well. What we're talking about today are more of the operational considerations, which would better inform the plan that would be submitted to NDE.
Cool. So with the first one, I'll pass it to John.
Sure. So the first consideration that we have to design for the modeling is to decide what the frequency of collection will be for curbside material. It's statewide, so the frequency has a moderate impact on the performance and cost of the system. So moving from every other week recycling to weekly is likely to increase cost. Potentially don't work increase capture, but it could increase capture. At baseline, currently in Maryland, the most common collection frequency for recycling is weekly, with some jurisdictions collecting every other week. Our sort of potential option that we're proposing is to align the current recycling service frequency, keep it sort of the same with where you are at the baseline if you already have the service, and then jurisdictions with new service under EPR, so those who did not have curbside recycling service at baseline will get every other week collection for recycling. So the rationale behind that is sort of keeping the current service frequency, not reducing it for places which already have it. And then the new service being every other week is expected to have a sort of a greatest performance for the cost and likely to get the most realistic for rural areas, as they may not have service currently, and there's probably a reason for that. So sort of electing to do the every other week collection for them. The other options which we considered were every other week for all residential households, weekly for all, and then sort of parity between recycling, curbside recycling and curbside garbage collection. But sort of the potential option we're proposing is to have current service frequency remaining the same for households who have service at baseline, and then jurisdictions with new service under EPR will have curbside recycling every other week. And now we can open this to discussion, right, Michael?
Yep, correct.
Scott?
Thank you. If the question is merely on frequency, holding everybody current, regardless of collection model, and then onboarding the new entities that don't have any collection now, I think makes sense.
Peter?
Yeah, I guess I partly just wonder, I mean, modeling purposes aside, I just wonder, does it need to be this exact? Why not just include at least bi-weekly, and the pro can look at a whole bunch of factors that it's going to look at for how to ensure that they're meeting the targets that they want to meet. There may be rationale to adjust to weekly for whatever reason. We may want to keep it aligned with waste, but allowing for some flexibility within the plan may be helpful, depending on what circumstances might be happening.
Yeah, I think just on like how the model works, it's kind of like a route-based model. So we need to put in something here, right? Like the collection needs to be a certain frequency. So I don't think this limits what can be in the program plan. Bradley, correct me if I'm wrong, but we just want to make sure we have something in here and to get your feedback on that. So yeah.
Yeah, and a good example is we have another one that's coming up that's going to talk about single stream versus dual stream. So if a county wants to decide that it's better for them to go dual stream, then they certainly can. So this is really trying, as Eric said, like what is possible with EPR, and to get a kind of in directionally correct on where we need to be. Other states, after their needs assessments, are doing more rounds of surveying as well, just to kind of be a little bit more surgical and dial in the actual program planning. So I anticipate that might happen as well as it has before.
Hey, Brad, let me add that just to make sure, Peter, that you're comfortable. This is a snapshot in time. This is not the executional, strict executional guideline. It's just to give us an idea of what the cost will be, and then we can work around it. You know, this is supposed to be a scenario planning eventually, so you can go up and down and model different things. But this is to just get us to a place where we have an appreciation of what this is. So this is not the final thing, so to say, but it is critical for us to really get to the next step.
Totally understand that. The reason I bring it up is just because in the slides, we talk about policy considerations and then we move into a modeling exercise, and it's easy to sort of get lost in between those two. So that's the reason I bring it up.
No, I understand that, but the thing is that remember the framework, we're going to be addressing the framework. You have room for things to move in between, but at least that will create some boundaries. We'll come back to that in the end. So just, I want to suggest that everybody understand this is just a snapshot in time to provide guidance for us. That's what they're doing. So please appreciate that. Thanks.
Thanks. Go ahead, Eileen.
Thanks. I just want to take another step back and just talk about, you know, the issue raised about multifamily. And as I understand it, so when you say residential households, you're including multifamily in that? Is that right? I think that there needs to be a thought put to whether that be the multifamily sector is split out from and differentiated from the single family sector, because the characteristics are very, very different. The collection method is extremely different. You are not going to get curbside collection for most multifamily residential units. In a garden style, in a high rise, you're really not going to get curbside service. So it's collected often more similarly to commercial collection. However, again, the characteristics of that sector are very different. Here in Montgomery, we actually, when we split things by sector, we split it 3 ways: single family, multifamily, and then what we call either non-residential, business, or commercial. So I just want to raise that.
Thanks, Eileen. I think that's a really great point. And there's 2 kind of considerations there. From a generation perspective, we're looking at multifamily material, which is consistent from a composition perspective to single family. On the collection side, in terms of how that material is serviced, we completely agree it's much more consistent with commercial. And we're doing our best to kind of navigate the nuances of that within our modeling and the needs assessment, but I absolutely hear you and agree.
Thanks. Yeah. And just don't forget curbside collection, you know, it raises the convenience level for our single family sector, which the multifamily sector does not benefit from, right? The way that they're collected. So that's a big aspect too, in terms of the data and the achievement, the level of recycling achievement that's happening. But that all goes to what are the opportunities? Thanks. Thank you.
John, did you have something to add for that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, confirm that we are going to split out sort of the single family and multifamily flows and collection methods within the model. So they will have sort of totally different configurations. We won't group them together for the purposes of how will they be collected.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And then there was one more hand raised.
Yeah, Eric, it's me, John Nyman. Just please keep in mind, because we actually offer both every other week and once a week service, the size of the container does make a difference, because, you know, for every other week, you might be able to get away with a 95-gallon container. And some locations have a 65. So when you're doing your modeling, just keep that in mind, the size of the container.
Yeah, thanks. That's good. And again, like we're trying to, provide like a performance and cost, and then as much detail as we can include some of that, like in container size included. There are some things that, when you get into the operation, maybe need to some really fine points, but that's helpful.
We will have to move on. We budgeted about 10 minutes per item.
Cool. Thanks everybody for feedback on that. So the next one is looking at residential curbside recycling access. So this is, of the residential single family, multifamily, what have access to curbside or multifamily, convenient recycling. So this really is one of the factors that has some of the greatest potential for impact, as more households with access expected to increase recycling rates. Like in terms of modeling purposes, if you push this up, it's going to have greater collection of material overall, but also with each new household or multifamily, building that you have, it does increase cost. So right now, based on the county reporting, about 80% of households have what we refer to as active service. So whether the service is automatically provided to them or in an open market system, they choose to subscribe. So there are still some that, maybe have an open market system where they could, but choose not to. So we're still refining some of that with some new data, but that's where it sits now. What we have in the model right now is expanding access. So all households with curbside garbage collection have curbside recycling. So, having that garbage and recycling equivalency. So the option, helps create an equitable recycling system by aligning its access and convenience to garbage collection. We do have other options considered, like universal collection for only single family, universal collection for single family and multifamily, or just, we can model a system that remains at that 80% access level. We think, what we have right now helps provide an equitable system that'll improve recycling rates, aligns with the goals that were established kind of at one of the beginning slides, but also, for households that currently have drop-off garbage collection, universal would give recycling without garbage there, and it might increase cost quite a bit and not be realistic. So we think that equivalency is most realistic. So that's where we're at now. We'll go to questions. Scott?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I understand what this means in the modeling scenario. If you're taking material that is at a drop-off location and introducing it into a curbside, I guess we haven't discussed whether it's all single stream or not single stream, then you're impacting contamination and quality and yield and output as well. So I'm not trying to be dense. I'm trying to understand how this is different than the last. Is this, you want everybody to have the service, or you want still people to be able to opt out?
Everybody will be provided the service, and then we'll have participation. Everybody with garbage collection at curbside will have recycling service at curbside, and then we will have a participation rate for that. So that does not preclude somebody from going to a drop-off site if they wanted, the services that are provided there. But yes, if there is currently a community that right now has drop-off only recycling and has curbside garbage collection, they will move in the model, which doesn't, there will still be choice and able in the program planning to design a different system, but for modeling purposes, that community would have curbside access to recycling with the system that we'll talk about, in a couple slides, and likely use that curbside system.
Okay, but with some variability on frequency and type of stream.
Yeah, so the frequency will be dependent on, that new system based on kind of what we discussed in the previous slides would be every other week. And then we'll have another factor about whether it's single stream or dual stream, which we can talk about.
Okay. I mean, I do think at some point you have to model the whole subscription thing. You know, whether you still allow a county to get reimbursed completely for, if a county decides that they want to continue competitive curbside single stream where every third house is being served by 3 different providers, you know, that's not entirely fair to the pro to have to reimburse the inefficiencies of that kind of thing. But that's probably not exactly in here. So
yeah, I mean, we'll look at some of the, you know, benefits to the system and, you know, route efficiencies, a little bit like that. But yeah, I understand your point. Francis?
Yes, hello. So to clarify, what if the county has curbside recycling collection but not garbage collection?
Like,
Charles County and Frederick County.
do they have curbside? Like, how do they get their garbage collection?
So it's the municipalities, the towns, the 2 towns within Charles County, they have a different system, but outside of the 2 incorporated towns, it is dependent on the landowner, property owner, HOA to contract trash service.
And are
And
they
again, I don't know if
required to
anyone from
get?
Frederick County is on the call, but I believe the last I checked, they have the same system, that there is no enterprise fund or general fund that pays for trash collection.
Yeah, that's a good, maybe a like unique point that we can look into. If you don't mind just dropping those 2 towns in the chat, or 2 counties, and we can look at that. Yeah, but I think maybe a special case, but I think likely they would get both service. If they already have recycling, they would keep recycling. We don't want to model a reduction in service.
And would they be required to provide trash collection then?
The system we're looking at is only about recycling.
Just clarifying. Thank you.
Thanks.
And just a comment, I know it's more on the county side, but for municipalities, we did put a pretty comprehensive list of municipalities that were doing their own collection or contracting out. But for the surveys, we got responses from a lot of them, but we didn't get responses from all of them. So just qualifying that. All right. Are we ready to move on to the next one?
Cool. Sounds good. Pass to John.
Sure. So yeah, this is our opportunity to talk about commercial generators. So similar to the residential side, we just spoke about how our commercial property is going to recycle under this sort of future EPR scenario. So this is likely to have moderate impact on performance and cost because there's currently a bit more generation of the covered materials that we've been presenting on in the commercial sector. So an opportunity to capture more of these sort of packaging and paper products. In the state, at baseline, our hauler survey confirmed that jurisdictions with high commercial or with commercial trash are also provided commercial recycling. 6 counties surveyed in our surveys mentioned that they have limited commercial curbside collection, and sort of large offices must recycle within the state. So sort of our potential and proposed option for commercial properties under this future scenario is that recycling service will be offered to all of the commercial entities, and that our sort of participation and active use of those services will increase compared to the baseline of participation in the state. The rationale is that the option will not mandate all commercial entities to participate, but will show that by providing the service, EPR can expand participation by lowering sort of the cost to elect to recycle in the state. So the other options we considered for this were targeted collection at likely high generators of packaging, and then to universal sort of mandatory commercial collection. But we sort of landed in the middle here with recycling service offered to all commercial entities, and that there's a assumed participation within that program for commercial properties.
Eileen?
So in the surveying and in the report, you are going to reflect that there are some jurisdictions that have mandatory recycling regulations in effect, covering, for some jurisdictions, everyone, single family, multifamily, non-residential or commercial. And in fact, so for some of those regulations, it's stated that entities like multifamily and commercial must recycle specific materials if they generate them, but yet the municipality does not collect any materials from either sector. That aspect is going to be reflected, or that subject is reflected in the needs assessment.
Yeah, that is sort of how we're directing this sort of increased participation, that it will, or there will be additional recycling from those entities, and that the ones that sort of are mandated but may not actually be collecting anything, that under the sort of EPR program, you can see those entities actually starting to participate.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, and Eileen, so our baseline will consider the places where participation is higher, maybe based on some of these regulations that require it. So then maybe participation in those areas doesn't go up that much, but in areas where it's not required, you might see participation go up more. So we're considering kind of the current state, and then what performance bump you would get based on an EPR system. Who pays, we're having the total cost, but not dictating who pays what, if that makes sense.
Peter?
Yeah, just quickly, 2 quick questions. Commercial, are you talking about everything, like industrial, hospitals, schools, office buildings, manufacturers? Is it scoped, or is this completely wide open? And again, are you including what a sense would be for some of these larger businesses, commodities? So OCC, pallet wrap, I'm assuming, is potentially being, when generated in high volumes, moving already.
Yes, so
with the attached to it.
Sorry. Yes, the scope of the commercial entities is initially very broad. Yes, so it would include more than just an office building. It would include the other schools and other generators, just sort of the covered material.
And I can add a little bit to that. We are working with the waste characterization results that MSW is producing, in that they did evaluate commercial and ICI streams. It does not include non-MRA materials. So some of those more industrial, potentially recyclable materials, I don't think are initially included in the scope of the capture rate, if that makes sense. But John, you can kind of jump in there if you have further clarification on that.
No, yeah, that's fair.
Abigail?
Well, sorry, Peter asked a couple of my questions for me, so thank you for thinking the same way I was. So is this contemplating providing commercial properties with curbside recycling? Because when I'm thinking of curbside, or when I'm thinking of commercial properties, some of the language here, just to make sure I'm on the right line here. Are we suggesting that Target would have curbside pickup for all of the boxes that they are pulling apart when they're receiving a big shipment before Christmas, or what is the vision there?
Yeah, I think we can probably maybe more detailed describe it as on-site collection. So yes, there would be some pickup of that material.
Okay. And so I think that it would be very important to have some clarity in the report or something about, you know, how this might impact existing contracts, long-term things like that, because, you know, from a paper industry perspective, commercial recovery is like one of our, you know, least contaminate, like the best source of exactly the OCC we want. And so, you know, making sure that the relationships, the contracts, that the generators and where it's collected from are allowed to continue that high level, and that quality is not diminished in the course of seeking to get everyone on board.
Yeah.
Like I would hate to see wish cycling suddenly start coming from the commercial side of things, I think is where my head is at with this.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Eric and Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just to sort of get access to areas which may not have it, but there is flexibility for those like maybe separate cardboard collections to continue to operate under the program.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
we
maybe,
wanna-
oh, sorry.
That's a pretty efficient way to collect that material. So yeah, we wouldn't want to put it in to that.
Yeah, because I mean, I would wonder if the lack of access to commercial collection at this level is not wanting to have a contract versus it's hard to get to where it could be. But sorry, I will give other people time to speak too. So thank you.
Delphine?
Yes, hi. Just so I'm also like everyone, I'm a bit unclear by what is included in commercial access. If this is on the go, if this is curbside recycling. I mean, usually we see that EPR doesn't cover you know, commercial access or on the go, and it's usually not very effective for this type of consumption. So I'm kind of wondering like what you envision to do there. And also want to say that this is very important for a recycling system to be effective. People need to be able to recycle everywhere. If you only implement something for your house, but you can't recycle at school, when you're in a shop, when you're like at a restaurant and stuff, you're not creating this behavior, this recycling behavior that needs to exist for recycling to be effective, which is another issue, right, with EPR, is like if you have curbside recycling, but people don't recycle, it's not effective either. So I'm seeing a lot of focus, I'll say, on like putting on curbside recycling, but curbside recycling is not the solution to all. And it's a little bit what Marta was saying in one of the comments. I see like several options in the same, in several small options in the same framework, when I would have loved to see like alternative options to maybe fix some of like real issues that we can see with an EPR framework. I hope I'm being clear.
Yeah. And for that, if there's more efficient ways for materials to be collected, like at a drop off or what we were talking about with paper, we would definitely want to consider those as well. I mean, we're going to have a discussion on films later as well. So, Chad?
And sorry, can I just jump in quickly for Delphine's point? I think it's a great point. I think, again, like the way this process is, there's not a defined framework or bill that we're, you know, doing a scenario based on. So we're trying to like provide some flexibility and give the data. We'll provide results for commercial and residential separately with like performance and cost. So I think our perspective, then the committee and legislators have more information. So as they develop a framework, can see that, and it helps them understand. If we just focused on modeling residential and then a legislator or someone says, oh, you know, what about this? What about this? And that information isn't available, it's harder to go back and do that. So I think that's a bit from our perspective. So I think there's a lot of great points, and a little bit might be more towards how then the program plan is developed and the framework is developed. But I think a lot of really great feedback, and appreciate it.
Yeah, Chance?
Yeah, just to point out, we're pretty much in support of what Abby and some others have said. I think that not allowing commercial establishments to sell their recyclables, in particular OCC and stretch wrap, would be foolish.
Yeah, thank you for that, Scott.
Yeah, Michael's comment, I think, largely covered it. My point is that an office building, a large retail, and a restaurant are very different kind of commercial establishments. I don't think it's good. In modeling, I think to the extent that you are separating the modeling for commercial, is largely going to do it. But you've got covered product that is at residential that you rarely see at office buildings. You've got stuff at office buildings that you rarely, no house that I know of, although I'm sure we can find one, is generating shredded paper at the rate that a commercial office building is generating shredded paper. So, I mean, just the systems are not always in correlation with each other. And I would, if you want to err on any side, I would err on the side of the streams that match the residential stream. But if you're going to separate the commercial modeling, then that largely, I think, can address it.
Yeah, and Andrew, so I'm going to move on to the next person, Angie. This part, we will have a public participation part at the end of this meeting, or if you want to put your question or comment in the chat, that'd be fine as well. Angie?
Hi, yeah, just real quick. I just want to kind of put it in everybody's brain that, this operational consideration for commercial access, I really don't think it's meant to disrupt the current commercial recycling, like the Walmarts and the Targets and the distribution centers that do the full truckloads and, go direct. Keep in mind, I don't think this is meant to disrupt that. What it's meant to do or to think about is to add additional access to those that don't maybe generate that much or have access to the haulers for recycling. It's to give access to those, I think. So I think, am I in the right direction that we're not really disrupting what's happening? Yeah. We're just providing additional resources to those that don't have it, right?
And that's a great point. We already have our current state, and these questions are helping to inform the additional collection capacity, stuff like that. So
I just think people are getting scared that this is meant to disrupt the current system, and it's not. The system that's working, where again the Targets go direct, and these massive truckloads of cardboard, go to these mills and everything and export. That's working. That's sustainable. That's great. It's again we're adding and giving access to those, and that's I think what the point of this is. Just keep that in mind.
I'm sorry, Bradley, but a lot of those commercial entities are exempt from paying. They're not paying, right? So if you're not paying, but then the pro has to start to pick up from office buildings, law firms not paying into the system, and then the pro is supposed to pick up from the office buildings or cover the cost of picking up from the office building. There's an imbalance as to who's paying in versus what services are being paid out. I think that's the bigger. I understand the not disruption, the things that are working in certain places, but who's paying in versus what services are being covered paying out. That it needs to be balanced.
Yeah, and we're likely going to have a tiered definition of like what a producer is, and if like a bottle is sold to, like a water bottle is sold to that law firm, then we'll have to figure out how to handle that. And like who exactly is the producer, but your point is taken. I'm going to move on to our next item.
Great. So the next one is on material collection. So how is that material collected? Mainly in curbside, whether it's single stream or dual stream. It may not have huge impacts on like top line recycling rates, but maybe have larger impact for certain specific materials if there's certain targeted materials. At baseline, the most common method we found based on the surveying is single stream, with 3 counties reporting dual stream. We right now in the modeling have current service remaining the same, So similar to others, we're not modeling a disruption to current service, wholesale changes. So if the survey had a county providing service single stream, that's how that county will be modeled. If it's dual stream, that's how that county is modeled. But in areas where new service will be provided, right now it's having modeling being single stream. Again, in terms of how the system and program plan and services would be provided, that's more in like the program plan or how framework is. This modeling would not preclude a county from deciding to do dual stream if they're a new service. But in terms of modeling purposes, we do have the capacity to model those different streams, so do need to select one for the different counties. So the rationale behind this is ensuring that residents will keep the same level of service, so what they're used to will have, and then aligning new service with what is most common. And then, we also could do like more of a wholesale switch of moving everyone to single stream or everyone to dual stream. We'll open up for questions and comments now.
Scott, I think you're first.
Yeah, well, this is the most critical, one of the most critical choices that the modeling has to make. So if you are still truly considering contamination and end markets and the viability of end markets and contamination and yield and volume into the system, single stream is not the best option. And I would just, I'm not saying you have to roll back places, but you need to offer that. And I wouldn't even just model one. I'd model, and especially if you're going to consider all the commercial, none of that's, very little of the commercial is single stream. So I think you need to keep some additional modeling in there for I don't know whether you want to call it the traditional dual stream that Montgomery County does, but some separation of streams.
And I just want to add on to Scott's real quick. So in Montgomery County, there's both dual stream recycling collection and single stream. So are you saying you're going to narrow it down to one, or are you going to try and leave it open for both?
How it's currently provided would stay the same. Yeah.
But that doesn't prevent a county from adding dual stream or switching to dual stream or new services choosing dual stream. For the purposes of modeling, we're putting forth going with the most common form of recycling for new services.
Yeah, and also most consistent with the available processing infrastructure. I think that's an important consideration there. We did talk to a lot of the processing facilities, and Montgomery County does have the dual stream system, so we don't want to model something that would force them to go a different direction, and we're not sure exactly what direction Montgomery County is going with their ongoing evaluation, but we want to make sure that it doesn't preclude a county from doing dual stream or location from doing dual stream, but there's just less dual stream processing infrastructure available across the state. If that makes sense.
Abigail?
Hey, just to add on to what Scott said, if the intent of this program is to improve recycling, to, create responsible end markets and so on, and develop these markets, having the best possible material by utilizing dual stream systems, creating, systems where there's not just if you've already been doing it, you're allowed to keep doing it. This is one of the actually proven things, like multiple places within the state and across the country, that actually results in better recycling and utilization of what's recovered. And so I just think that serious thought should be considered to, promoting dual stream, not just allowing dual stream to continue in those places where they have, decided to do it. So
yeah, and I just So I don't think we're saying that dual stream doesn't give you a better end product and higher quality, and you get higher revenues from that. I think that's all true. A lot of this was based off of interviews with counties in addition to Montgomery County, with haulers, with the different MRFs as well, and their current capacity and their current infrastructure. So if that's something that we want to take a look at, like maybe increasing dual stream, but that's also a decision that a county has to make as well, in large part. Or we do have some private MRFs as well. That would be a decision that they would need to make as well.
Appreciate that.
All right. Okay, I think we can move on to the next one.
Cool, John.
So our next consideration is compliance. So how to ensure that basically waste is properly sorted for recycling versus reducing contamination and shifting materials from the sort of trash stream into the recycling bins. So the description is the sort of investment made at drop-off facilities and in curbside recycling to ensure that waste is properly sorted between those two streams. The impact would be on increasing the amount of material that is properly placed in recycling, reducing contamination, thereby increasing capture overall. At baseline, compliance in some counties is implemented through mandatory recycling ordinances, volume-based recycling requirements, and limited office recycling laws. Some counties have between 0.5 to 2 full-time equivalent employees in place to support compliant efforts for multi-family recycling, but many may have none. Our sort of proposed option for this is to have investment in compliance supported by EPR and beyond existing programs. So this is sort of a moderate investment that can increase capture and reduce contamination while providing flexibility for how this enforcement exactly is implemented. The other options we considered were no increase in compliance and enforcement, sort of keeping the system where it is now, and then high investment compliance and enforcement within the system.
Yeah, and we did get a question on what's the difference between compliance and education, which I think you can definitely do education through compliance activities, but education would probably be more on like working with the user, and then compliance could also maybe even include working with the producers and stuff like that. So they're definitely intertwined, I would say. But one is looking more at trying to ensure that we are that we're following the laws, and then the other is a little bit more proactive approach.
Yeah, I can add to that kind of clarification. The way I'm thinking about this is compliance is helping to inform the correct decision making at the point of decision making for recycling. That's at the curb, that's at the drop-off station, and those are people to make sure that the generators are doing it correctly. Where education is a bit more, dollars spent towards providing key information and deployment of that information through apps, Recycle Coach, utility bill inserts, typical kind of education and outreach, and that's where there's a distinction in Eunomia's modeling. If John, Michael, feel free to additionally clarify.
So just to clarify, we can't necessarily advocate for Recycle Coach, but that is one example of a app that provides education. Peter?
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, this is creating a new budget item, to some extent. I don't know how Maryland municipalities or others would identify this costing. Typically, I know a lot of municipalities, if they've got OOP stickers, they'll build that into their education and outreach budget. So I guess I'm just cautioning in the sense that are you double counting things by taking the TRP numbers, which are $10 per household, and adding it here and simply increasing the cost that they already potentially included as part of their $10 per household in outreach?
Right. I can sort of answer that, but no, we would look to sort of separate, as Eric said, the sort of hours spent with these people on the ground for compliance measures versus what is more of the education campaigns and those types of sort of marketing-based initiatives. So we would try as much as possible to not do that.
But John, your best practice you're using is $10 per household, and I guess my question is, did TRP include that when that number was initially developed? Was that built into those costs that would include things like group stickers and that compliance side at the door?
Right. So okay, we will then look to find out exactly how much of that might be that amount. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll take a look at that, and then if it is a large proportion of that $10, then we might adjust. All right. Are we good to move on to the next item? Cool. All right.
Cool. So the next one is on education. So this is, the level of education and awareness initiatives across the state, promoting good recycling practices, participation. What the impact it has in the model is that it would increase, participation within the modeling. We have, whether you have access to service, whether it's active and you have the ability to actually recycle and put your bin out or take it to a drop-off site. And so it would increase that participation and then also lower contamination. So within the modeling, better education would, promote better sorting and capture rates. And so there are current jurisdiction-run education and outreach programs. 40% of the jurisdictions surveyed provided recycling education in multiple languages. About a third provided, house annual spending, which was about 50%, 50 cents to $2 per household. Currently, what we have in the model is, best practice level that is recommended by the Recycling Partnership, which is $10 per household. It's really, really challenging to have like a regression analysis to understand cost of education spent per household and increase participation, increase recycling. We have some data points, but having that perfect cost curve of identifying the exact most beneficial places is challenging with limited data and studies that have been done on this. So, we're following kind of what some industry stakeholders have said, and that's with like TRP at best practice for $10 a household. There are other options and kind of moderating that if reducing costs, but that's what we have right now. So it can open up to questions.
I think your answer relates to Martha's question. Martha, do you have anything more, or did that answer what you were asking about?
Yeah, it's very frustrating. There's been a lot of education going on in my county, all the different languages, and yet my neighbors are continuing to do the wrong thing, including putting everything in a plastic bag. So I don't know how you can really evaluate the effectiveness of just education. There's some data points somewhere. I'd love to see them.
Martha, just for your question here about the detailed assumption, we're not going to get into determining that at this moment, but based on our evaluation, there is at least looking at it from a planning level perspective, the counties and municipalities that reported providing any education had a significant increase in their reported recycling rate. So I think, we just, the point is to, get everybody to be educating at a pretty consistent level across the state. Those that are already doing it there may be some benefits in further increasing education, but if you're already putting OOPS tags and having compliance measures in place, we're looking to get the whole state kind of up to that level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we actually had Jessica Moore with PG County give a presentation on some of the outreach that they did to non-English speaking community at a NERC subcommittee meeting. So maybe might be good to bring in and just have a better understanding of that. But it's very difficult to model like what's the return on investment. We just know that recycling increases when you do education.
Brad, if I may add, don't forget that the idea is to have a base model here and that enhancements will happen in the future. Let me give you an example. For instance, where I live in Baltimore County, for the recycling, if you put it in a trash bag and put it in there, they won't pick it up. They take it out and drop it on by your mailbox. I'm talking about curbside recycling. And that's one way to tell people what not to do. So I don't think you can model such things into this. Those are enhancements, but no question about education does lead to improve the recycling and people putting things appropriately. But it may not be a one-time thing. It may be something you do multiple times as people begin to accept the new things and enhancements that we will be making through this process. So I think it's well taken, but Eric, I think you guys understand that we can refine all of that here, but education is important.
If we could take one more, I think Eileen, you have your hand raised, and then if we could circle back to the dual stream and single stream slide, I think we'd like to just make sure we have a clear understanding from the group on that after this one. So please go ahead, Eileen.
Thanks, Eric. So it looks like you're really keying this education to single family households. So is the report going to go into, or is there consideration in the report about outreach and education to the other sectors, commercial sector, for example?
This is not just focused on single family. No, it'll be all sectors, and we can talk a bit. But again, the purpose of the modeling is not to stipulate the exact methods to go through that'll define what a good education program is. We want to have some realistic considerations in terms of the cost and the potential performance increase, and how to meet that would be, more part of program planning or bill development. But the education will, as far as modeling purposes, will have a benefit across the different sectors. Not just single family.
The reason I say that is because your costs are per household.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's kind of
so it makes
to
it
determine
that
like
you're
the total
talking
cost. But yeah, I understand that.
Per household, right?
Yeah.
One thing to consider is to get that performance increase in additional curbside, additional commercial collection. I won't say curbside. Part of that is technical assistance that could be provided potentially, by a county or city entity for the commercial businesses in that jurisdiction. And I think just for the modeling purposes, understanding the system-wide cost on a dollars per household basis is how Eunomia's model functions. That John, Michael, does that kind of accurately capture that?
I mean, we would make assumptions based on where the education is targeted, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I just want to go back then to the material collection. I think just on some sidebar conversation, maybe a nice like compromise, or to try and get everyone's input. So we could do collection method for current service remains the same. So not, changing new service, but aligning, or not changing current service, but aligning new service to the capacity or setup of the local MRF. So if there is capacity to provide materials locally to dual stream MRF, then doing dual stream. If it's single stream, to do single stream. Hopefully, maybe that will try and provide a system that utilizes some current infrastructure, but also provides, new service through different collection methods. Ellen?
Yeah, thank you. I hope you guys can hear me. I just need a quick point of clarification on that question. Just get an idea of what report we're talking about, who's sending it and where it's going and who it's from. I just think that's important. I knew the one task was we need to develop a correspondence to the General Assembly on an EPR system. And I'm going to, at the end, I'll ask Brad to outline what that correspondence is going to look like, because I think, I know that I would like to get a look at it. But what report are we talking about right now? And where is it being sent? Is it being sanctioned by this advisory council? Or are you just doing this at NDE's request? Just trying to, I just need some clarity.
Thank you for the question, Ellen. If I could just if we could maybe put a pin in that question for the moment and get back to the specific operational question related to single stream and dual stream, that'll help us keep us within the time frame where we only have about 20 minutes left. Although we would like to respond to that question, and we can provide clarification there.
Yeah, I'd like you to respond at the end of the meeting before the time's up. Happy to waive right now, but I think, digging down into new mandates and details on modeling in a report, I do think it's a relevant question. So absolutely, I'll defer and let others ask, but I'd rather, hear from you at the end of this presentation first, so we all understand. Thank you.
All right. Are we ready to move on to the next night? Or Scott, sorry.
Thanks, Bradley. I'll just reiterate, look, at a 30,000 foot level, the existing system that exists in Maryland today, where counties and jurisdictions largely moved to single stream, and the MRF infrastructure that exists today services largely that collection modality, was driven by in a system where taxpayers or ratepayers are paying for the collection service, and then everything else moves to the private sector after that. Laying the new system that's paid for by the private sector on top of the existing system that was driven by other financial reasons, it does not necessarily make sense to improve the system. I would argue that new service shouldn't lay into the existing system, that new service at a minimum, multifamily, especially when it's a greenfield and there's no service now, should consider some separation of the streams so that you get better outcomes, not lay into the existing system that needs to be addressed and fixed anyhow. So that's if looks like we're not voting, but that's where I would.
Yeah, no, I cannot. I so agree with Scott. I think aluminum and glass, it's the same issue. Contamination is real, and when material can be recycled over and over again, the difference between single stream and dual stream is tremendous. So anywhere where it can be implemented, because nothing exists, that's definitely the solution.
There's a whole network of transfer stations that could be employed with a little bit of augmentation to accept dual stream into things. It doesn't mean that the single stream MRFs go away. It just means that less material is flowing through those particular facilities.
Okay, I mean, it is helpful feedback and the type of feedback we wanted. I think for this one, we'll just have to talk with MDE and come up with our approach. And thanks to both Scott and Delphine for providing helpful feedback on that. John, on the next one, technology.
Sure. So this is related to the level of technology investment and infrastructure at sort of the post-collection sites within the state. So the impact of this increased tech and investment can support better sorting at MRFs and increase the yield of collected materials and potential bale purity as well. So at baseline of MRFs that responded to surveys, some have access to ballistic separators, optical sorters, and air classifiers, but technology is sort of not, it's not universal, the level of technology across the state. So recycling processing infrastructure includes state-of-the-art single-stream facilities, dual-stream facilities, mini-MRFs, push and bale facilities. So sort of a wide range of facility types for one state, and the composting infrastructure varies depending on the tier 1 and tier 2 classifications in the state. Our sort of proposed option for the level of investment here is sort of targeted investment at MRFs to manage key materials where there's capacity for adding or expanding equipment, and then on the compost facilities, supporting existing tier 2 facilities to accept compostable plastics for packaging. Rationale behind these was to there may be size and operational constraints for complete overhauls and retrofits for best-in-class technology at all MRFs and composting facilities, and a more targeted modeling approach will help show a more feasible investment approach, at least within sort of the initial phase of the EPR program. This does not preclude MRFs from continuing to invest as the program matures later on, but just sort of for the initial outfitting of the EPR program, this is what we are proposing. And yeah, sort of again, a middle ground between sort of no investment assumptions and the complete best-in-class technology upgrades across the entire system. So again, this does not, we are not going to mandate that MRFs that have a current level of technology roll those back to be a uniform standard, but that there will be an assumption of investment in the MRFs across the state to get to at least some consistent level for targeted materials.
Peter?
Thanks. Totally get the MRF side. Just on the compost side, what are you, how are you modeling what technology, what's the scale of the investment that needs to be made to those tier 2 facilities?
Right. So that will be carried out sort of what will be required in order to allow these facilities to accept this material. And generally that is in my experience, Eric, correct me if that's something else you were thinking, but it's mainly to do with sort of contamination purity and making sure that you can accept what is the true sort of composting material and how it, and ensure that that is what you're accepting and not it not being combined with other non-compostables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we heard from the surveying is that compostable packaging, compostable plastic in particular, is a major challenge without some investment in key equipment. And so we'd be looking to take that same approach to show investment from a screening perspective to make sure that it doesn't negatively impact the quality of the end product, but not necessarily same way with MRFs, having to increase all of the tier 1s, which only take kind of yard waste, dry organic material, to upgrade to be able to take food waste or additional materials at that point. Only the tier 2 facilities that may struggle with some of the compostable plastics to make sure that they have the equipment and operations in place so that that doesn't negatively impact their business.
Delphine?
Just for the aluminum industry, I'm wondering if you're looking at eddy current. It's not best in class. It should be pretty standard at this point, but it makes a huge difference for can recycling.
Yes, so we're reviewing this, each piece of
This is considered as in the options, the introduction of eddy current.
Yeah, most of the MRFs have eddy currents, eddy current processing for aluminum recovery. There are some facilities like the push and bale mini MRFs that would not have that type of infrastructure. And so we're really not suggesting that a mini MRF, for example, Wicomico County would get a brand new facility, have to permit everything, and introduce some more automated processing, this is more getting at, similar to the composting, being able to make sure that the introduction of material covered under EPR doesn't negatively impact their business. For example, bag breakers on the front end, upgraded glass recovery systems in MRFs that maybe don't have it at this point. And that's kind of the level of investment that this potential option considers. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, it does. And would you be considering the level of investment that would be needed depending on whether you are dealing with dual stream or a single stream, because that would be probably different too, right?
Yes.
I don't think we're not going to model the transition.
Because when you make a
between,
cost analysis, right, the cost of dual stream may be more, maybe higher than single stream, but then the investments that would be needed would be lower on the sorting side. So I'm just wondering if this is like a consideration when you look at the model.
That's a really good point.
And yeah, I mean, yes, there's a good point. But yes, there will be a sort of differentiation, the level of glass cleanup operations you would need at the start, the single stream or for dual stream. So that's a big one that we will look at. Yeah.
All right. Seeing no hands, are we ready to move on?
Cool. So I think this is, the last one. So we have about 10 minutes. Hopefully we can get through it. I know there were already some questions on this. So I guess maybe framing it two ways. We need to determine the materials that are included and covered materials as part of the system. Right now, we have primary, secondary, and tertiary packaging with some exemptions in the system. There's options to adjust that covered materials, and then there's also what materials would be collected as part of curbside, and then also drop-off sites. So, if you have a larger list of materials that is uniformly collected across the state, then, your collection and capture rates might be higher. Could be some other impacts of that as well. Won't read out the baseline of all the different materials that are collected, but, we have information from MRFs and counties and municipalities of what material is currently collected. So what's currently in the modeling is, a list of covered materials that might be a bit wider stream of materials based on the characterization study, and then also planning to model like harder to recycle materials like flexibles, plastic film collected at drop-off facilities to also target some of the materials that aren't collected right now. So, the rationale being to harmonize recycling programs across the state, which would have its own benefits, while allowing for additional materials to be added as the state builds capacity and accept them over a phased approach. So I guess maybe good opportunity. I don't know if we'll come to like an exact resolution, but yeah, a good time to get feedback on what people think should be both included in the covered materials list. Mainly, I think that tertiary packaging, and then also, what would be collected through programs, curbside and drop off. And I think mainly thinking about like plastic films.
Peter?
Just had a quick question based on the last slide. Are you building in the cost to collect compostables separately, or how is the model dealing with compostable packaging when it comes to collection?
So it won't be. It will be a separate sort of organics-based collection that won't be sort of in the purview of the single-stream recycling costs or drop-off costs. But it's separate. Yeah.
So you're modeling out separate collection for green bin and just specifically compostables.
Right. So the aim is to get the cost of the compostables in that green bin. Yeah.
So that's a percentage of the overall cost. Are you saying like, so if compostables make up 2% of what's in the bin and you're allocating 2% of the cost, or you're just.
Yes. So we want to identify as much as possible what the cost of those compostables are in that program.
Abigail?
Yeah, thinking about this, sort of what should be on the accepted materials list and creating some clarity on what is and what isn't, I think it would be extremely important to, and I realize that I say this a lot, but to have room for innovation. There needs to be a clear process for if something isn't currently on a list, but situations change, processes improve where something becomes more easily recycled, the process, or there's a stronger market for it, that there is a reasonable, dynamic timeline and process for adding the materials in if they're not currently on an accepted list, so that you don't have, because there are big opportunities of having a readily recyclable list, that can make some of this process really easy, right? It can create some clear pathways for where things should go. But if a material is not on that list, that can actually have the potential for a detrimental impact where investments aren't made because there's not a clear pathway for it could be determined as recyclable going, in 2 years from now. And so I think that in addition to what is and isn't right now included, I would like to see some language on, if you can show these 3 factors or something, that it can be added to the list in, 2 years or something like that, and vice versa. I don't want to imply that like once you're on, you're always on. As nice as that would be, but a process along those lines would be beneficial, and it's something we've seen in other states too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the other states are, or I should say some of the other states are taking a more phased approach with the opportunity to add some of the harder to recycle, or I should say collect and recycle materials later on. So I mean that's going to happen anyways, just with innovation. I think with this, we're looking more at the costs with early state EPR, with the understanding that it's going to expand. Ellen?
Yeah, we're getting to the end here. I just want to bring up this thing about this report, because a couple people have said I'd like to see this language added, and I just think it's important that everybody on the call at least have an understanding on what report is this, where is it coming from, and who is it being delivered to. Not, I'm not being negative. I mean, some of the things are good. I just want to make sure that what this is.
There's actually 2 deliverables. There's the needs assessment, which is delivered to I think it's to the governor and the 2 subcommittees, and then there's report on the findings and recommendations from the advisory council. So at our last meeting, we voted on 2 recommendations, and the findings. What we're thinking about that is we have a lot of really good presentations from this group, so we were thinking about including that as attachment, and then we have another meeting scheduled on or in January to talk about the framework, whereas today was more operational consideration.
And just to hear that clearly, neither of them required this report. This is something that is added to our scope that you feel necessary. Just you believe that it was a requirement. There was the needs assessment and then the recommendation for the framework, which we didn't deliver.
So for this,
or not framework, let me take a recommendation for EPR. I'm just trying to understand this report and language being added and subtracted, and who's it coming from? Is it reflective of this group or MDE, I guess?
so this report is coming from MDE right here. And in the, I don't have the law in front of me, but we are required to consult with the advisory council, which is why over these past months, we've been, as we start to get information, we've been showing that to the committee. We have also made some changes in the needs assessment based off of feedback from this advisory committee. So a good example of that is we've heard some strong opinions that have a more detailed breakdown for the waste characterization study from multiple different stakeholders, not just one. So we now have a more detailed methodology for the waste sort as well. We also interviewed many of the folks on this call for the needs assessment as well. So we are taking into consideration that input. But this report, there's 2 deliverables in the law. This report is MDE deliverable, and in that we're required to assess the cost of an ETR system. So this modeling effort gets to that. Chad?
Yeah, I think this has been a very good meeting. I think the data and the reports is fascinating. But we really need to get this stuff earlier than the day before the meeting.
Yeah.
We need time to reflect and think through. There are things I disagree with in the needs assessment that just aren't worth bringing up in this particular session, but I think it was a very productive meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, and I hear that. We were still clarifying with people on the interviews last week or the last 2 weeks. So it's just unfortunate with the timing. We essentially had to start the needs assessment in August, which doesn't really work well with the legislative schedule. I do have to open it up to public comment. And then I think this was the last one. And then you have the additional information, which would probably bode well to the framework conversation that we're going to have in January. So I'm going to open it up to public comment. Is there anyone in the public that wants to make a Malcolm?
Thank you so very much. This is Malcolm Augustine, the sponsor of the legislation. I just want to say thank you to all of you for all of this hard work that you've put into this. And I'm particularly looking forward to the receipt of the needs assessment that's coming so that we'll be able to act upon it in this upcoming legislative session. And so I hope that, as you mentioned, Chaz and others, you'll continue to look at it closely, add your feedback, add, what you think it is important in and out of it, so that it will help us as we move forward in this legislative session. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other comments from the public? Cool. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. This has been a long time coming. As you saw early on, our contractors were working on potentially 10 or 11 different concurrent activities at the same time. So this has been a pretty complex project, and we're hoping to deliver the needs assessment in January. Thanks so much.